Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining me now for a look at the Big 12 as we get ready for the weekend from Rattle and Hum Sports, the Big 12 insider, Kevin Lonnquist. How you doing, Kevin?
Always good to talk to you, Bryan. I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you very much. Before we get to the football part of things, I want you, as the Big 12 insider, to reflect on the death of Darrell Royal earlier this week.
Well, it's obviously a sad passing. It's kind of one of those moments that marks the time in college football, especially in the state of Texas, and more importantly, to the University of Texas. And if you think about what Darrell Royal did at the University of Texas, with the number of accomplishments that he had there, I mean, he recruited Earl Campbell. I mean, the thing that I've always loved during this week of remembrance is just the way Doug English spoke of him and what a tower of a man that he was, and the expectations that he placed on his players, and that the athlete was one thing, but doing what you were told to be doing on the field was really what is important, and how he basically created a renaissance, if you will, in terms of the academic part of things for student athletes, and making sure that that was going to be more of a focus because the fact that the time constraints were involved. It's a great life to live to be 88 years old, and I think what's even more fitting to him and how well he was loved and received down there, of course, what he did at UT is tomorrow in the Longhorns play Iowa State. I read where they're going to have their first offensive play from scrimmage is they're going to base out of the wishbone.
Yeah.
Because he obviously invented that, and I think that's just, you couldn't speak higher of a man. I think I've shared with people, and this is not to use symbols because of the UT Tower, but he was a tower of a man.
Yes.
Very modest. Took every accomplishment that he had in stride. I got to meet him once many, many years ago. I couldn't even tell you when. But at the same time, you knew that you were just meeting a great man. And it didn't matter if you didn't like Texas or not. You liked him and you respected for what he stood for.
Absolutely.
And really, that's what, he was kind of like he's to Texas what Bear Bryan is to Alabama and what John McKay is to USC. And those types of guys that, it was the same way when John McKay passed away, and the same way when Bear Bryan passed away at Alabama, that it was one of those moments that it really hit that family hard. And there's going to be some emotions on the field when they play Iowa State, but I'm sure the Longhorns will be fine. But it's a great era, and it's one of those moments where we all just thank Darrell for what he did for the game of college football.
Well said. Okay, I want to ask you about a couple of ball games from last week. TCU beating West Virginia in overtime in Morgantown was absolutely enormous, I thought, for Gary Patterson's program.
Absolutely. Got them bowl eligible for one. So they get the important 15 practices before whatever bowl game they might be going to. And if you get on our website, I actually have some bowl projections as to where I think some of the teams are going to be going. But you know what? I love the fact that Gary, they could have settled for the tie and gone to the third overtime where they made everyone go for two on touchdowns. But Gary said, let's go win it right now. And I think it was a great call. I mean, win or lose, even if it didn't work, it's a great call on Gary's part because he needed to change something with his team. They were going through a flat spot. They played a terrible game out in Stillwater the week before. They got the sucker punch on the punt return earlier in the fourth quarter. They actually created their own break too when West Virginia's pass coverage apparently went off to Charleston on the 94-yard touchdown pass to Josh Boyes. But I think Gary just knows his team so well that he just said, you know what, I'm going to take a shot here because I want to win the ball game and see if I can sneak out of there with a win. And it worked, and good for them. And I think it gives them a lot of momentum and a better feeling about themselves the way they go into the Kansas State game tomorrow night.
And let's talk about that because I really do believe TCU has a legitimate shot to beat Kansas State tomorrow night. Do you?
I do, for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't know the extent of how effective or how healthy Colin Klein will play. Again, Colin, for those who may not have heard, if you haven't, I don't know where you've been, but again, he left in the third quarter against Oklahoma State with what they're describing as concussion-like symptoms. Bill Snyder has said that he will play, but to what extent, with head injuries, how do kids respond and how do they react? And so how much are they going to rely on John Hubert, the running back, to help them move along with on the Concline. TCU's special teams are going to have to be really up to par because Tyler-Longview does a great job on kickoff returns and punt returns. He had a kickoff return for score last week. And the other thing that's going well for TCU is that they're going to get people at full strength back, or I should say, better health-wise. Offensive lineman Blaze Foles seems to be over his ankle problem. Matthew Tucker should be in better shape, dealing with his high ankle sprain. And Brandon Carter, one of their talented wide receivers, is also appearing to be getting through his ankle issue. So the fact that they're going to be much healthier than they have in several weeks really helps the Horned Frogs. It's going to be a great atmosphere too, Brian, because the fact that this is the first time since 1970 when Texas was there that the number 2 team in the country will be in Fort Worth.
I'm very excited about it. This will be my first visit to Amon Carter Stadium, and I'm really looking forward to the ball game tomorrow night. I think it's going to be a blast.
Sure.
All right.
I think it's going to be a really good football game, and I'm looking forward to covering it as well.
Oh, it's going to be great. Okay, the other game, and I have to tell you, I was completely caught off guard by Texas beating Tech in Lubbock.
I was too. I mean, I think we talked about this last week when I thought that Seth Dickey was the better quarterback and that he was going to make more plays. And really, he did. If you look at it statistically, he did do his part against Texas. But what the difference was is that David Ash rebounded very nicely for Texas. He has the big touchdown pass of 75 yards to Mike Adams, or I'm missing on his name now. But anyway, Mike Davis, And I think the one thing is that when he made that play early in the game, I think it really changed David's attitude. And then you look at the way Jonathan Gray's been running the football. He has another 100-yard game out there in Lubbock, Bryan, and really created a lot of balance there. And quite frankly, the Texas defense made stops when it had to. So they're up 31-22, and Tech drives out, and their special teams comes up with a blocked field goal. And then the way they just shut the game down in the final several minutes of that game.
Do you think this is a sign that Mac has got this thing righted now?
I would think so. But of course, it's a week-to-week thing with them. And obviously, again, going back to the emotions of losing Darrell Royal this week, how are the kids going to react to that? Well, of course, a lot of those kids don't know who Darrell was. They know who he was, but that sort of thing. I like 2 weeks ago, Brian, we're talking about how awful they looked against Kansas and how they were barely fortunate to come out of that game with a 21-17 victory on a last-second touchdown. And then they turn around and go to Lubbock and play like this.
Yeah.
I think part of it might be because that the Texas kids know the Texas Tech kids really well because they were all either played against each other in high school in some form or fashion, or they were being recruited by Texas and Texas Tech at the same point, or something along those lines. And I think that's probably where the emotions kind of come into that game more than maybe against Kansas and saying, "Gosh, if Kansas is awful, they're the worst team in the Big 12. We should be able to just roll it out there and go play," which was obviously not the case. They had to survive to come out of Lawrence with a win.
So I would imagine that this ball game tomorrow, again, you're talking about all the emotions. The only downside is it's an 11 o'clock in the morning ball game, but I would imagine the emotions will be high in Austin for this. So how do you see this game playing out with Texas and Iowa State?
Well, and before we even get into that, the other thing, too, is that Jake Knott, the talented linebacker for Iowa State, is out for the year because he had shoulder surgery a couple weeks ago. So that really changes the dynamics of Iowa State's defense. I mean, you lose a preseason All-Big 12 performer like Knott, who was obviously first-team All-Big 12 last year. And that really changes how well that defense can play. It lose A.J. Klein over, and they got to do a lot of reshuffling there. So that really hurts them. And, I mean, I would think that Texas also remembers, too, what happened in 2010 when the Cyclones came to Austin and knocked them off. So there's going to be a lot of that, if you want to call it payback, or if you want to just call it being the better team, which Texas is. They should win this game by a couple of scores. Maybe a score like it was last week against Texas Tech. But I think Iowa State will battle. I mean, one thing that I love about Iowa State is even though they are losing to the Oklahomas and the Kansas States of this conference, they've been in every game this year. And those kids play so hard for Paul Rhodes. And I don't expect anything less from them unless they just were to come out flat tomorrow in Austin. I think the Cyclones will hang with Texas. I don't expect them to win the game. Again, I think it'll be about a two-score game in Texas's favor.
All right, West Virginia takes on Oklahoma State. West Virginia's figuring out what Baylor already knows. You got to play some semblance of defense to compete in the Big 12. I mean, you don't have to play great defense, but you got to at least, throw up a little bit of resistance once in a while. And so it's exposed West Virginia. So how do you think that plays out at Stillwater?
Well, number one, it's a reunion a little bit for Dana Holgorsen because he was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State before he went up to Morgantown. So there'll be some nice reunions going on there. Aside from that, the Mountaineers' pass defense, which is the worst in the nation, gets another test. And now Oklahoma State's problem is the fact that they've got quarterback problems because Wes Lunt had he left the game against Kansas State. Much like Colin Klein with concussion-like symptoms, and so they had to go to their seniors, and it's just been a mess from a quarterback standpoint up there in Stillwater. I think this is a game where if they can't get the consistency out of the quarterback play like they want, I think this is a game that really screams for Joseph Randall to kind of get control of it. West Virginia's rushing defense is a little bit better than its passing defense. And the Mountaineers, basically, this was the dirty little secret, too, Bryan, was the fact that the Mountaineers' defense, even though they got off to the quick 5-0 start, they weren't stopping anybody. And even though I had proclaimed, I think, on one of your shows, probably going into the Kansas State game, that I thought that they were a Big 12, or maybe the Texas Tech game, that they were a BCS national contender, I said they do, but they've got to get their defense figured out, and obviously that's not been the case. And I don't know if, even with Oklahoma State's quarterback problems, I don't know if West Virginia is going to have enough answers to win down there. And Geno Smith has really tailed off.
Yeah. And when people are starting to figure him out, and again, you just got to play some defense somewhere along the line to be able to have a chance.
Right, and the other problem with the Mountaineers, too, is that if you look at all their wide receivers, they don't have a guy consistently who's physical enough to take on, these physical defensive backs in the Big 12. They've got maybe, I think Stedman's about 6'2", maybe 6'1", 6'2", but everybody else is 5'10", 5'11", and they're all 180 pounds or less. And it's just over the course of a 12-game season, you have to have thicker kids, taller kids, more physical kids to handle the grind of a season like that. They probably could have done that last year in the Big East against Connecticut, Rutgers, Syracuse, and that sort of thing. But it's a different ballgame down here.
All right, briefly, Oklahoma plays Baylor this weekend. You see any chance Baylor wins that ballgame?
If Oklahoma turns it over and Baylor's offense doesn't turn it over, I don't see the Bears. Now, remember, the Bears just beat OU for the first time ever last year, and every time they've gone up to Norman, they've gotten blown out. I don't see where the Bears can hang in Norman.
Yeah, and Texas Tech has the open date against Kansas this week, so nothing else needs to be said.
I will say this though about that game is I really like to watch James Sims, the KU running back. He's got 5 consecutive 100-yard games, in spite of the fact that Kansas's offense is really brutal because they don't have zero quarterback play, and they're not very good on the road. But he's a fun kid to watch. And the thing I've liked about James Sims is the way that he bounced back, because he missed the first 3 games. He was suspended for a DUI that he got back in the spring, Bryan. And the fact that he bounced back, and in spite of this lousy season that the Jayhawks are having, he's personally taken it upon himself to do whatever he can to show some leadership here. And it's nice to see the way he's bounced back.
Yeah. Good stuff, Kevin. Thanks very much for coming on with us today, as always.
My pleasure. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.